Hi everyone, I'm going to be talking to you about designing teamwork and how you can take a design approach to the way that you work with your team and your colleagues. But first of all, I want to do a little exercise with you. Very simple object, a paper clip. I want you to, just on your notepads or your laptops, for the next 30 seconds or so, come up with as many uses of a paper clip as you can as possible. Okay, now I want you to choose the idea that you wrote down that you think would be the most lucrative. Okay, so what ideas do you have? Do you want to shout out? Anyone want to shout out at me their most lucrative idea?
Earring.
Sorry?
Earring.
Earring?
Hop out SIM cards.
Hop out SIM cards, yeah.
Lockpick.
Lockpick, yeah, could be very, very lucrative, in fact.
Drawing.
Drawing, okay. Brilliant. Clipping paper together, that's the one that I always get, actually. Okay, so the reason I wanted you to do that quick exercise is I just want you to show you a little bit of a difference between the way that you generate ideas and the way that you come to decisions. So the first part of that exercise was about generating as many ideas as possible. It was about divergent thinking. You were looking for possibilities, looking for opportunities. And then in the second half of that exercise, I asked you to kind of select the best idea, the one that you're going to go forward with. And that's convergent thinking. And there are two very different types of thinking. And it's this that I've kind of been obsessed with throughout my whole career, this idea of the balance between creativity and productivity. Because you can't really do those kinds of thinking at the same time. You know, first of all, it's about generating lots of ideas, and actually coming up with ideas is almost the easy part. It's the making the ideas happen that can be more difficult. And when you put a team into that context, it becomes even more difficult. So this is what I've basically been doing throughout my career, trying to find this balance between creativity and productivity, because they're not really at odds with each other. They work in collaboration, but you have to know when to switch between the two. So that's what I do at Bracket. I help creative teams to work better together. And when I say creative, I do mean that in the kind of widest possible sense, because we know that everybody has the potential to be creative. So it's really anybody that has creativity and innovation as part of their job role. They have to come up with ideas. And a lot of the work that I do takes place in workshops, in the workshop format. So I run kick-off sessions for teams, I'll do brainstorming sessions, strategy sessions. And then increasingly what's happening is people are asking me to help them learn how to run workshops as well, because they see that this is something that they're doing quite frequently within their teams, this way of working in workshops, working more collaboratively, generating ideas and taking ideas forward is something that they kind of skill they need to use on a more regular basis. And also do things like other bits of training and consultancy around helping teams work better together. I've also written a book on effective workshops, and I will be giving you some workshop tips in this talk because I can't resist it. It's kind of my passion and my thing. So you'll get some practical tips for workshops as well. But essentially, I'm a collaboration geek. That's it. I've just been spending my whole career finding loads of sort of resources and using my experience to try and figure out what are the best ways that people work together. So in this talk, I'm going to be sharing a lot of my insights that I've gathered over the years, and also some bits of my experience, some things that I know work in practice as well. And hopefully, my aim is by the end of it, you will have at least one thing that you can try with your team on Monday. I'd like to kind of pack lots of practical tips into my talks. And there is a lot packed in, so I have got a link at the end to download the slides, so don't worry about missing stuff, because you will get everything as well. So this is what I'm going to go through where to start. Where do you start in this idea of designing teamwork? I'm going to talk about the project kickoff, because that's really where a lot of stuff happens. That's really where you set up a lot of the environment, the atmosphere for a team to work successfully and well together. I'm going to talk about what I mean by team habits and explain how you can start to build good habits or break bad habits within your team as well. And then I'm going to talk about meetings and workshops. As I said, I can't kind of resist it. It's my thing. Okay, so teamwork is changing. Working in teams is nothing new. We all work in teams, and we've been working in teams for a very long time. But because of the way that the industry is going, because of the way that the world is going, it's moving much faster. We need to bring diverse teams together to address complex challenges. We just need to bring different viewpoints, different expertise into teams. So this is the way that we work. And if we're not even working as part of one team, we're probably working across multiple teams and projects. It's such a big part of our working life that, I believe that we should be spending a bit of time figuring out how we work together so that we can make our working experiences great, productive, we can be more engaged, we can create happier workplaces as well. So when you think about team building, it might be this kind of thing, this kind of one-off event that takes place, a muddy assault course, or, getting everyone together and doing a trust fall, or, those kind of sometimes cringe-worthy activities. Some people like them. I find them a bit cringy, but, each to their own. But actually, those do work. They do create some, social connections between team members. They're fun, but they shouldn't really just be a one-off thing. Actually, team building should just look like this. It should just look like every part of our day. We should all be thinking about how to make our teams better as part of our jobs. And it's something that we see in our daily work. And the reason, when we're thinking about designing teamwork, we're actually good at it already. We already have all of the skills that we need to design our teams. We are creative people. It's a very creative task. We're coming up with ideas of how to work better together. We're looking at how we can solve problems. We're looking at, what are the challenges we're facing within our team, and how can we develop solutions to make our working lives better and easier. We're also thinking about user experience. If you think about your team as the users of your working process, then actually the skills that you use to create great experiences for your customers and your clients, you can turn that inwards into your team as well. Some of the best workshops that I run are where teams have the opportunity to use their creativity on how they work together, and they come up with some really great ideas. And then it's also about experimentation as well. There is no one right way. We have to be looking at this as a constant evolution and constantly testing things out, changing things, tweaking things. And as I say, these are creativity, problem-solving, user experience, experimentation. We know how to do this stuff already. So why do we need to look at designing teamwork? Because if you think about it, we're all individuals. We all have our expertise. We all have the way that we like to work. And we know how we have certain ways in which we get our best work done. Now, when you bring a group of individuals into a team, into a new team, then what that means is that team is going to have its own unique identity as well, because all of the individuals have their own unique identity. So when you bring them together in a team, then that's going to create a new culture as well. And then when you bring a project into play, then you've got, a new situation, a new problem, a new challenge to address. So that brings in new dynamics. So even if you've got a team that have been working together over a period of time, you address these, you're starting a new project, then there's new dynamics in there. And then you've got, what's happening from the outside, all the kind of the environment that you sit in, the context. So what this means is that there's no one-size-fits-all for effective teams. We kind of need to take each team, each situation, each project, and start from scratch. And that's where the design process comes in really well. So, when we talk about effective teams, for me, there's two main factors that I think are essential for effective teams. And if you think about all of the challenges, all of the problems that you've had within your team, it will probably, when you kind of peel back all the layers and you get right to the core of it, it will probably fall into one of these two areas. And the first one is communication. Two factors for effective teams. The first one is communication. And the second one is trust. And as I said, any problem or challenge that you've had with your team, if you kind of boil it back right down to its core, then you'll find that it falls into one of those two things. So it's not just me saying that. There's lots of research that backs it up. But what this research shows is that how you work together is more important than what you're working on and even who you're working with. So just think about that for a second. It's got nothing to do with actually who's in the team and the project that you're working on. The thing that's going to make the successful team and make you high-performing or more effective is how you work together. So there's a few bits of research that I want to present to you. The first one is from the MIT Human Dynamics Lab. And they did some research a few years ago. I think this is from 2012. So Alex Pentland, who had kind of led this research, what he did was he asked teams across various industries, different types of teams working on different projects, to wear wearable devices. And he wanted to monitor the patterns of communication that were happening within those teams. And again, they found that they didn't monitor what was said within those teams, but they could see a pattern between what was happening in the high-performing teams versus what was happening in the low-performing teams, just based on the types of communication that was happening. So the most effective teams, they found that they communicate frequently, they're constantly chatting with each other. There's also equal contributions. So there's not anyone dominating the conversation. Everybody will talk and listen in equal measure. They also engage in frequent informal communication, so it's not just about work, work, work. They're also kind of socialising and chatting with each other outside of the project. And also, when you watch them, again, you couldn't tell what they were saying, but you could tell that their discussions were quite animated. They were facing each other. They were using hand gestures. They were really getting into their conversations. So that's one. Again, nothing to do with who is on the team and what they're talking about, just how they're communicating together. And then you may have heard of this research from Google. So we know that Google hire the best of the best. Is there anyone from Google here? Yeah, okay. Oh, there's someone from Google. Congratulations. Okay, so you know that Google hire the best of the best. And they were really interested to find out what was it that made their most high-performing teams. So what they thought they would find is, looking at the types of people that were in the teams, how they brought those teams together, the interactions between the different disciplines. So they did like a massive, widespread research across the organisation to start to identify the factors that were important in these high-performing teams. Again, they were surprised and they found that it had nothing to do with the talents, the individual talents of the people on the team. What mattered were these 5 factors. So the fact that people that were on the teams felt that their work could make an impact, the fact that the people who were on the teams could see that their work, see the bigger purpose for what they were doing. There was meaning in their work. They had structure and clarity around roles and responsibilities and clarity around tasks as well. And they could also depend on each other. They knew that they could depend on their teammates to get the job done. But at the top of the list, the thing that was most important was this idea of psychological safety. The fact that the team members felt that within their teams, they could be vulnerable in front of each other and take risks. They felt that they worked in a safe environment where they could fail and they wouldn't be ostracised or punished for it. Again, nothing to do with who is in the team, but more to do with the environment that's created in the team and how they work together. So again, we focus a lot when we're working on the actual project, on the actual quality of the work. That is obviously important. We also need to spend quite a lot of time thinking about how we work together, and that's probably going to elevate the quality of our work as well. Okay, so this is quite a big subject. When we're thinking about teamwork, where do you actually start? It's, we can start from anywhere. We can start, quite big. We can have these kind of lofty goals about working together. But where do you start? So we start with self-awareness. We start with yourself. How many people here would say that you're self-aware? Put your hand up if you think that you're self-aware. Okay, there's quite a lot of you. I'd say like 50%. Well, this researcher, Tasha Urich, she's written a new book called Insight, which is all about self-awareness. And when she interviewed lots of people, she found that 95% of us think that we're self-aware. But actually only 10 to 15% of us actually are. So just this statistic cracks me up. It's so funny because we're not actually self-aware enough to know that we're not self-aware. It's hilarious. Okay, so we've got a lot of work to do. So we can do that through things like, taking personality tests. I'm sure, many of us have done personality tests like Belbin, Myers-Briggs, etc., DISC. There's lots of them out there. But I really like this idea, actually, that's going around at the moment, this idea of creating a teamwork user manual. So it originated from this guy, Ivor Cockcroft, I can't pronounce his last name. He was, at the time when he spoke about this, he was a lead strategist at a company called Questback. And he was interviewed by a New York Times journalist about his leadership style. And one of the things that he said was that he had created a one-page user manual to how to work with him. So every time he joined a new team, or every time someone new joined his team, he would hand them this one-pager of how he likes to work, which I think is quite a useful thing. There's lots of kind of teams who have adopted this in various ways. Some people kind of create, some teams create baseball cards, almost like with a kind of picture and a list of the way that teams like to work. Some people keep it on Trello or share this information. But the main thing is that you do it yourself. So some of the questions that you want to ask are, how do you get your best work done? When are you in flow? When are you most creative? What kinds of roles do you usually take in a team? Do you like to take in a team? Are you someone who likes to come up with ideas? Are you a doer? Do you like to kind of get down to the task? Are you good at keeping people coordinated? What's your communication style? How do you communicate with people? Do you tend to be quite direct? Or do you need time to kind of reflect and think about things before you provide an answer? How do you like to get feedback? Do you like it kind of straight in the jugular? Or do you want to, people to kind of coat around the issue? It's kind of like me, I'm a bit sensitive sometimes. But yeah, how do you like to get feedback? And what do you find difficult about teamwork as well? Think about, where do you find your challenges? Where exactly do you need help? So the questions for you to think about is, how do you do your best work? Where and when do you do your best work? And that's the place to start. Okay, so the project kickoff. After you've identified what it is, the way that you like to work, you understand yourself, then the project kickoff is a really good opportunity to set the path for the team to work well together. It's actually massive. So there's Richard Hackman, who was a team design expert, one of the foremost team design experts, knew a lot about team dynamics. And he spent years and years doing research across lots of different high-performing teams across industries, aviation, automobile, creativity, business. And he identified that actually most of the work to make a team successful in working together happens before they even start working together. So 60% happens when you're in team design mode. And when I say team design, I don't just mean who's on the team, but creating the environment for that team to work well together. 30% happens in the launch of the team, so that's like the project kickoff. And then only 10% of the work to make a team successful actually happens when they're doing the work. So that's 90% of the effort to actually put things in place so that the team works well together that happens before they even start working together. This is where the project kickoff comes in. I think the project kickoff is a really great opportunity, firstly, for a team to come together and share things like their one-page user manual, how they like to work, to get a good context of the project, to look at how the project might play out over a period of time, how they're going to work together. I actually created a template for a project kickoff. What I did was I looked at lots of research that I could find around high-performing teams, and I reverse engineered it. Say, okay, if this was where we want to get to, what is the stuff that we need to do in the project kickoff to make that happen? And actually, I've got, if you want to get the slides, then I've included my project kickoff template as part of that download as well, so you can get that when I give you the link at the end. But it's things like, the team, as a team, everybody on the team needs to kind of understand the bigger purpose and see the bigger picture for why they're working together, because it's one of the things that keeps motivation and momentum and engagement going throughout teamwork. So it's important to kind of cover that in the project kickoff. Sharing team expertise. Everybody on a team needs to know exactly why everybody else on that team is there, so that they can understand and respect the diversity of opinion and the diversity of skill. And then also, as I've been saying, a team in the project kickoff need to discuss how you're going to work together. What kinds of meetings are you going to have? When are you going to have them? How are you going to meet? How are you going to communicate in between meetings? And it's this kind of stuff that I'm talking about today. So when you look at that project kickoff and you're working in a team, what kind of information is missing for you? Do you know all of that stuff about your team or the project that you're working on? And if you don't, maybe it's time to kind of have that conversation so that you can fill in those missing gaps. Hey, team habits. So I like to phrase this team habits. I don't know if I'm using habits in the right way, because I know that people can be quite specific about the difference. Well, there is a specificity difference between habits and routines and rituals and those kinds of things. But I like to call it team habits. And what I mean by team habits is the kinds of things that are behaviours that teams do on an ongoing basis to work well together. And they can be, bad habits, they can be good habits. But if you're thinking about creating new habits and behaviours in your team, then it's worth having a bit of background about what it takes to build and break habits. I mean, we all have probably tried to build new habits or break bad ones ourselves, and we know how difficult it is to get going. So you can imagine when you're trying to change behaviour yourself, how difficult that is when you try to put it into a team context and you've got not just one person, but lots of different people trying to get them all going in the same direction, doing the same thing, how challenging that can be. One thing that we do know about habits is that we can't rely on willpower. Willpower is just, it depletes throughout the day. We kind of have a limited amount in the daytime. It starts off quite big, and then as the day goes by, it reduces. So we can't rely on willpower. We actually have to design for the behaviour that we want to see. Again, this idea of designing teamwork coming in. What behaviour do you want to see in your team? BJ Fogg is an expert in this. He's a professor at Stanford University, and he's created lots of tools and techniques to help people build good habits and break bad ones. And one of the first things he says is that you need to get specific. You need to not only say where you want to get to, i.e. we want to collaborate better as a team, we want to work better together, we want to communicate better, or we want to build more trust. You need to be specific about what that behaviour is that you want to see within your team. So one way to do this is kind of like a workshop type, meeting type scenario, is that you can work with your team and kind of get them to brainstorm, what are we doing already? How do we already work together? What do we want to start doing? What do we want to stop doing? And what can we continue doing? And the way to do this is just give everyone a stack of Post-it notes. I'll talk a little bit about this later when we're talking about workshops and meetings. Give everyone a stack of Post-it notes, get them to write their ideas down and sort them into these 3 areas. So that gives you somewhere to start. You know that these are the areas that you want to address within your team. What do you want to start? What do you want to stop? What do you want to continue? The next step in BJ Fogg's model for behaviour change is you need to make it easy. You need to make it so simple that actually it could be harder not to do. So one of the examples that BJ Fogg points to is, say for example, you want to start the daily habit of flossing your teeth twice a day. If you give yourself the challenge of saying, okay, every morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to floss all my teeth, then it's actually quite a big jump in behaviour. But BJ Fogg says that what you should do is break that down to its smallest part. So I'm going to get up and I'm going to floss one tooth today. That's what I'm going to do. And then try that for a week, so you're kind of training yourself to get into the behaviour. It's so easy to just floss one tooth because it doesn't take any time at all. To say it's almost harder not to do it. So how can we kind of take that concept into our teams? He has another tool called Tiny Habits, which is what I just explained to you, this whole idea of kind of breaking things down into their smallest part. But how can you do this in your team? Perhaps, again, you can do it in a workshop setting. Give everyone a stack of Post-it notes, put out the question, what can we do to make our team work better? And just a brainstorm, everyone writing one idea down per Post-it note. And then you need to, this is the divergent thinking phase, and then you need to kind of converge and sort of come up with a few solutions that you might try. So you can use something like this, the effort impact matrix, which is another tool you can use for making decisions within your team anyway, moving from divergent to convergent thinking. So what is going to be low effort or high effort to implement, and what is going to make low impact or high impact. So once you've got all your Post-it notes, you can start to sort them into the respective areas. And then obviously what you want to get to is the ideas to move forward with that are going to be low effort, not going to be much effort at all, but they're going to make a high impact. And that gives you an idea of where you can start with changing your team's behaviour. Okay, so this is a really good example of something that's really tiny and really small. So the research that I had mentioned to you earlier, the MIT Human Dynamics Lab, as part of that research, they had put wearable devices on people in call centres, and they found the same things, that the teams that were working well together were those that also engaged in informal communication. So one of the consultants on the research project suggested to this call centre that actually get everybody in your team, in a specific team, to take a break at the same time, a coffee break, just 15 minutes, not very long at all. And this went against all of the ideas of productivity and efficiency in call centres. But when they tried it, it actually boosted productivity so much, in fact, that they decided to implement it across their whole company. So just a 15-minute break, a 15-minute coffee break, had made a massive difference because it gave people the opportunity to talk to each other. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes, it can be 5 minutes. Anyone from Sweden here? Yeah, so you probably know this already. You have something in Sweden called fika, which is this idea that, at either 11 or 3 o'clock, the whole team just stops and takes coffee together. So fika just means to have coffee together. It's this idea of kind of meeting and connecting. So, it's not just research that shows this, it's, happens in practice as well. Okay, so the final step in BJ Fogg's model for behaviour change is trigger the behaviour. There needs to be something or someone that starts it off, because we can't rely on willpower and we can't just rely on memory. So whether that's like an email reminder or somebody that owns and then facilitates the process, somebody or something needs to start it. And this is a great example. So Atul Gawande wrote this book, The Checklist Manifesto, and it was all about the power of checklists. Such a simple, basic thing, but something that was found across various teams to, again, increase their effectiveness and their productivity in the way that they work together. One example he gave was in hospitals, surgery teams reminded before surgery just to introduce themselves to each other and say hello before they started before they started on the surgery. And again, the effectiveness and the number of mistakes reduced as a fact of them just introducing themselves to each other at the beginning of the surgery. And they were just reminded to do that via a checklist. Almost resisted it at first because it seemed so basic, but just a way of, again, reminding your team to kind of put these behaviours in place and change. The thing about team habits is that once you implement them, you put them in place. They're not set in stone. You need to kind of constantly be iterating, so you need to design your team habits. You need to then put something out there, test it, experiment it, see whether it works. Then you need to iterate, review it. Is it working? And then repeat it. So keep going in that cycle, design, test, iterate, repeat. This is an ongoing, continuous process with your team. So what are the habits that you can build or break in your team? So meetings and workshops. So this is kind of, the area where I think there's opportunity to make massive difference in the way that we work, because we all spend so much time in meetings. In fact, apparently, in the US, $37 billion is wasted on meetings, or spent on meetings in the US every year. And that's based down to, who's going to be in the room and the salaries and those kinds of things. But I think we can probably all agree that we spend too much time in meetings. The thing is that, as part of teamwork, they're unavoidable. And if you can be quite kind of consistent and also mindful about the types of meetings that you have and when you have them, then it can actually form a really good rhythm and cycle to the way that you work. There's going to be meetings that you repeat throughout a project, such as your kind of daily, your weekly check-ins. But then there's also going to be perhaps your project kickoff that takes place at the beginning of a meeting. There's going to be ideation workshops. There's going to be retrospectives at the end. So, planning out and thinking about the different types of meetings that you have throughout a project and how they work can really, as I say, form a rhythm, a heartbeat to the way that you're working, and making sure that they're effective and productive themselves. So first thing you need to think about is, why are we meeting? what's the purpose of the meeting, and then what's the format of the meeting, what's the right format of the meeting. I try to collate all of my information about, or my knowledge, and other people's knowledge as well, about the types of meetings that you could run as a team, and I came up with 26 different types. So, you know, when we sit down and we think, okay, we're going to call a meeting, we often think of, yeah, let's just get everyone in a room and have a chat. But actually, we can be a lot more purposeful about the types of meetings that we run, and whether they're workshops as well, whether they're running a more workshop-type format. Okay, so some workshop tips. And these apply to meetings as well. So these are workshops in relation to working with your team. This idea of designing for the outcome, you know, workshop preparation, I also see that as a creative and a design task, because actually what you're thinking of is not just what's going to happen in the day. You're thinking, what is it that we need to produce in order to move this project or idea or product to the next stage. So almost kind of imagine yourself after the meeting or the workshop has taken place and think, okay, what is it that we need to have for it to be useful? And then you design backwards from there. Design for group dynamics. There's loads of things that happen in meetings. This is why facilitators are needed in workshops. So there's all kinds of things, problems that teams can run into when you kind of leave them to their own devices. One of them is the whole introvert-extrovert thing. If you get a group of people together in a room, you're going to have a mix of introverts, you're going to have a mix of extroverts. Introverts are people that like to think before they speak, and they don't like to be put on the spot. Extroverts are people that speak in order to think. They need that kind of social interaction to form their ideas. But what can happen in a workshop is that the extroverts will dominate, because that's just how they like to kind of communicate and work with each other. So you can design methods into your workshops and your meetings to make sure that everyone gets a say and can equally contribute. One of those methods is brainwriting, which is basically just when you pose a question or you get people started on an activity, just asking everyone individually to write down their ideas first before they share it in a group. So this is where those tools that I introduced you to at the beginning of the talk, the start, stop, continue, and the impact effort matrix, you give everyone a stack of post-it notes and you ask them to write down their ideas individually first and silently, and then you start discussing them. And it gives the introverts a bit of time to kind of catch up and kind of gather their thoughts before they start discussing them. Another thing that can happen in workshops is groupthink. Which is where people go along with an idea just because they don't want to rock the boat. And actually, it's not the best idea. It's just perhaps the idea that someone has said first, and people don't want to contradict them. And this happens quite a lot with the dynamic between perhaps more senior staff and junior staff. So when you've got kind of people that are more senior in the organisation and they talk and they generate ideas, then it may be that people go along with those ideas because they don't want to contradict them, they don't want to make them look stupid. So one of the techniques that you can use to avoid that is dot voting, where people generate ideas anonymously, you put them on a wall, you don't know where those ideas came from, and you give everyone a stack of stickers, and they just vote on their favourite idea. So the best ideas will float to the top, not just the ideas that came from a more senior member of staff or the extrovert, for example. And then also making a space for productive conflict, because when we're working together in a diverse team, we want that productive conflict. We don't just want everyone to agree with each other. The whole reason we've got people together with different opinions and different skills is because we want to use that diversity to innovate. So we need to create space for productive conflict. Now, this needs to be different from the ideas generation. It needs to be different from the kind of divergent thinking task. But actually, we do need to kind of create a good space within workshops or meetings for people to critique ideas as well. And the reason I've got a black hat up there is because there's one technique, which is Edward de Bono, the 6 creative thinking hats, and each hat has a different colour. And when you're metaphorically wearing a certain colour hat, then you have that thinking mode, and the black hat is for critical thinking. So it's about making space in workshops and meetings for productive conflict, because it does need to happen. And then don't forget your follow-up. So lots of people within workshops, focus on the day and having a great time and generating lots of ideas. But then what happens to those ideas afterwards? They need to be turned into something. It's the kind of convergent, making stuff happen, the execution side of creativity. They need to be turned into something, not only to move the project forward, but to give people confidence in the workshop format. You know, it's a great place for generating ideas, but at the same time, you need to make sure that something happens with them as well. So not forgetting that follow-up, making sure that you turn those ideas, that content, into something useful, and people can see where their ideas have gone within the project as well. So question, how can you make your meetings more effective? Are there workshop techniques that you can bring into your meetings which allow for more equal contributions, everyone to get involved, ensure that there's kind of productive, healthy conflict that we need in innovation and creativity? I just want to finish with a couple of examples because, you know, teamwork, even though I'm biased, I love workshops and meetings, teamwork isn't all about workshops and meetings. You know, in fact, you know, even though a workshop is probably a very intense version of good teamwork, we can't work like that all the time. But we do want to kind of take those principles into the work that we do every day. But we do also need time in between the workshops and the meetings to get on with our work. And to concentrate and focus, which is where this concept of deep work comes from Cal Newport. He's written a book about how we can manage the demands of collaboration and the demands of technology and really carve time out for ourselves to focus on our craft and to become masters of our craft in a sense. So this idea of deep work can be quite challenging within an organisation or within a team, but also being aware that, you know, in order to be good as part of a team, you need to have your specific skills that you develop as well. A couple of examples of companies that have done this. Asana, which is the productivity tool, they instigated what they call No Meeting Wednesdays. So across the organisation, everybody in the company is encouraged not to have any internal meetings on a Wednesday so that everybody can hunker down and get their work done. Probably quite difficult to implement, but quite a nice principle. So I did at least carving out certain times of the week where everyone is just going to kind of concentrate and do their individual work, which they will then obviously bring back into meetings and workshops. And then another example is Buffer, which is the social media tool. So Buffer is a really great company for sharing the way that they work and constantly thinking about how they work better together. And one of the things that they found was they were using Slack, a really great tool, very, very useful, but it was interfering with their work. So they decided to come up with these kind of 10 rules that they called the 10 Slack agreements for how to use this technology so that everybody could get the best out of their work and get the best out of each other. It's a blog post on their website that you could probably find. But one of the things that they identified for the Slack agreements was this idea of you're responsible for managing your own downtime. It's up to you to turn off Slack when you need to concentrate and get on with your work. It's not up to anyone else. And then also other rules around being kind of mindful about how you communicate and how you contact people, particularly as Buffer is a remote team and they're based in different locations across the world. So a couple of examples there about sort of how teams and companies have kind of managed and developed almost like habits and principles for their teams working well together and getting the best out of each other. And, you know, for me, this is kind of, you know, the idea that if we want to be creative in our work, if we want to be innovative in our work, it's not just enough to think about the products that we create or the work that we create. We can also innovate the way that we work with each other in order to create sort of better workplaces, a better working environment, and to do our best work together. So that's my sort of final question to you. How can you innovate the work that you do together? Thank you very much. And there's the link for the slides and the project.